Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Risk Crew webinar series. Today's webinar is SOC 1, 2, and 3. Do you know the difference? Actually, the whole webinar series is called Sock It To Me. I take full credit marketing for that marketing title. As you can see, I thought that was funny. We've got one in. I believe we'll have 3 webinars on this topic. Anyway, welcome everybody who's joining us today. I think you'll find it very helpful we're going to talk about the material in terms of if you're considering SOC, if you're looking at SOC as a GRC framework, both to enhance your current controls or to as even a marketing differentiator for your clients or for your company to your clients. This will probably be very helpful. You should know who we are. If you don't, we're Risk Crew. We're a GRC and testing consultancy located up in London. Been in business for 15, 16 years now. Product agnostic. We take a very, very simple and pragmatic view of things and believe that if you can't measure results, you're not getting any. Anyway, that's who we are, and who I am is Richard Hollis. I'm a director here at Risk Crew. I've been here since we started this up. I'm a director of waistcoats. I'm catching a lot of flack today for wearing my waistcoat. I was telling somebody before the video, an American wearing a waistcoat is a dangerous fashion statement. Anyway, the good news is I'm not presenting today. For those of you who have seen me present, and we've got even better news that we've got some guest speakers today. So we've asked some of who we consider our go-to guys for SOC compliance, and we're going to have 2 speakers join us. One, we're going to have Mike Hughes join us. Mike's a director at Prism. He's got about 30 plus years in GRC and audit experience and hands-on experience getting SOC attestations, as well as he's going to be joined by Stephen Connors. Stephen Connors is director at HW and Controls and Assurance. Stephen's got hands-on experience, been doing this for years and years. The difference between, we've asked both of them to speak. What Mike brings to the table is preparing people for their SOC 2 compliance, and Steve's got the experience of walking in the door and on compliance day. So we thought we'd offer you both some experience from both sides of the coin. Anyway, like I said, they're our go-to guys. They're both a wealth of information and good speakers. So we're going to ask them today to walk us through the material. As if you've never joined our webinars, these are hard things to do, as you know, but we ask that we try to make them as interactive as possible. And I wish I had more jokes to make this more pleasant experience, but my job will just be to walk us through the material. And if you have any questions, flag them to me, flag them up, and I'll pose them to Mike, Steve, and make sure you get some answers. As I said, the curriculum, the agenda we've put together today is for almost first timers. If you've had the SOC, if you've got a SOC compliance, this might not be so as helpful to you. It's a 101. It's an entry to the topic. We're going to talk about what is it, what is the SOC compliance framework, what's the difference between the 3 levels, SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC level 3, and for each level, what are the reports for each, and of course, we're going to back up then and talk about the 5 trust criteria that are applicable to each framework, and then have a kind of an open discussion about what perspective should you come at this if you're considering SOC. What's the right SOC report, level 1, level 2, level 3 for your organization, and what are the commercial benefits? And there's quite a few. Some are obvious and some not so much. But like I said, we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. So please, if you have any questions, submit those in. We'll take questions well after, keep submitting them in, and anything that we can't get to during the webinar, we'll do our best to respond to you by email. I'm going to have Mike and Steve's contact details up at the end. The last slide. We'll take some live questions at the end if we have time, but we will not let any question go unanswered. And as I said, we'll give you Mike and Steve's direct contact details so you can contact them directly with any questions. Or if you have questions about their sense of humor, because I tell you, I've known both of them, and I have some significant amount of questions about their stand-up comedy chops. So let's get started. Let me introduce, let's start at the beginning, shall we? Well, what is it? Let me introduce our Mike, can you join us here? Mike, Stephen, why don't you join us as well? Come on camera. But let me introduce Mike Hughes. Mike, could you walk us through, just start us right at the beginning. What is SOC and why should we be considering it?
Yes, okay, great. Thanks, Richard, and thanks for inviting us here today to talk about SOC. So what is it? So as it says on the slide there, it's a system and organization controls. But why? It's really for service organizations. So there's two aspects there. One, it could be a service organization wanting to demonstrate that it looks after its customers' data securely and sensibly and does the right things. It could be that you are an organization using a service provider and you need to get some comfort over the controls that they are operating to make certain that your systems are safe and secure. The concept has been around for many years, probably back end of the late 90s, beginning of the 2000s, when a lot of organizations were looking at third parties to process their data. And it started off life as SaaS 70. And many of us who are experienced in the game still really refer it to SaaS 70. But nowadays it is SSA 18 or ISA E 3402, or as we see here, SOC 1, 2, and 3. It was first really sort of envisioned by the American Institute of Public Accountants, but it has become a worldwide phenomenon now. So that's the what. Going on to the why. As an organization, we can outsource the responsibility of processing our systems, our data to a third-party provider. What we can't outsource, though, is that accountability. We still need to make certain that our data is being looked after appropriately, securely. So we need to get some comfort that the controls that are operating over that data is appropriate. If we are under Sarbanes-Oxley, we'll be well used to this. We need to start thinking about this around GDPR now, because one of the requirements of GDPR is that we are making certain we are looking after our data and making certain our data processors are doing the right job. So how do we get that comfort? So we go to a third-party independent association organization. So an independent auditor that is going to go in and audit that these controls are operating correctly to protect our interests. As I said, it could be that we are an organization that is using a third party, so we want to get some comfort that those controls are operating effectively. It could be we are the third party processor, and we want to demonstrate to our customers that we are processing data effectively and securely and keeping the interest of our provider happy. I'm just going to now hand over to Steve, and Steve will take us through the three types of SOC: SOC 1, 2, and 3.
Let me interrupt, guys. Mike,
Yep.
we had an incoming question. So SOC is an extension. Its genesis was SaaS 70. It's starting to become an international framework for benchmarking your services and having your services independently verified. How is this different? The first question was, how does this differ from an ISO 27001 control framework? Literally, in terms of frameworks, the two, in terms of guaranteeing the security, the integrity, the availability of these systems. How does this differ from ISO 27001, guys?
Okay, so 27001 will give you a certain level of comfort. This is taken to the next degree. We'll talk about the different types a little bit later, but
okay.
We are going into and we are testing for controls far more robustly than you do in a 27001. Going back a few years ago, I undertook a SaaS 70 attestation for an organization who had just gone through 27001. So there was a bit blasé about it. Oh, we'll do this, we'll sail through this, no problem at all. When we finished our attestation, the comment was, we know we have been audited now. because we do go, much more robust testing, which therefore gives you a higher level of confidence factor.
And when you say testing, you mean the integrity of the controls themselves that have been implemented to protect the platform.
The controls are operating effectively, and they've been operating effectively over and consistently over a period of time, usually 6 to 12 months.
Again, sorry for the interruption. Steve, you were going to talk to us about the types of reports.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And if anybody's tuned into this channel expecting the comedy club, my apologies. You've got the three of us instead, so we try and keep you entertained. Yeah, the three types of SOC reports. Mike spoke briefly about the introduction to the SOC reports. The SOC 2 report is what is usually on everybody's mind, but I'm not going to jump about there. I'm going to start at the beginning. So let's go for SOC 1. Really, when one thinks about these, what we're looking at from an organization's perspective is in terms of a need and a want. So if we look at, start off with looking at the need generally relates to a SOC 1 type report. For example, if we're dealing with a listed company that has various stakeholders that rely on external auditors to validate and pass an opinion on the financial statements, as we know, auditors look at an organization's financial statements and pass an opinion, and that opinion states that their statements give a true and fair view. The stakeholders rely on this audit report, and the auditors rely on executive management to ensure that they've got an operating environment that's governed ethically and responsibly. As we know, an integral part of governance, or as we know, is a strong and robust internal control framework. So it's incumbent on management to actually implement a strong framework that ensures confidentiality of data, integrity of process, and availability of systems. Logical, you may say, but there's a problem, and it's called trust. Some of us are old enough to remember Enron and the start of what some people view as the Sarbanes-Oxley approach to wanting a separate view on certain elements of the accounts. So we come to a point of how can senior management and external auditors assure themselves that the management information they rely on is correct. Both senior management and the external auditors need to have confidence in the underlying systems and processes that are used to drive the numbers that find their way into the financial statements. So when we talk in terms of senior management, we think mainly of the executive and the board, who generally then have several tiers of management who are tasked with implementing and operating the control environment. So they're all good people. We like them. They're all honest. So we can just rely on them to say, guys, it's fine. Nothing to worry about. Everything's working perfectly. They tell us what their controls are. And this is an important bit, because when they tell us, we ask them to describe the controls. So we call that management's description of controls. So a SOC 1 report, in essence, is about taking management's description of controls, checking that they are sufficient to achieve their objectives, and then testing their application and operational effectiveness. External audit base their opinions on an assessment at a point in time. They conclude that the accounting statements present a true and fair view, and plus allows the auditors these days to give a view on going concern. So what they want to do is test or have another independent body test the internal controls that management have put in place to ensure that the figures hold integrity. And this is where the SOC 1 report comes in. It is a support mechanism, basically a support mechanism for senior executive management and the external auditors to take comfort before they sign off the financial accounts. And what they're looking for is that the controls environment is well designed and consistently applied and in line with good practice. So to recap there, SOC 1 is focused on a set of controls created by management to support financial reporting. Typically, but by no means always, these will fall under what we will usually call IT's general controls, which tend to focus on identity and access management and change and configuration management. So if you are looking at the SOC 1 report, or you have sight of one, because you really shouldn't have, if you're not one of the stakeholders of the business, be relying on having access to these, what that is actually telling you is the external auditors have relied on auditors, maybe within their own firm or an independent firm, who have an expertise in the area of assessing internal control systems as they support the production and generation of the financial data. That is what a SOC 1 report is giving you. It's giving you, it's not telling you that this company is a good egg and absolutely perfect to share your own personal data with. It's not giving you any of that comfort whatsoever. It's giving you confidence that the company is run in a manner which gives stakeholders confidence in the financial statements. That's what SOC 1 was designed for. If we look at a SOC 2 report, this is driven by the want criteria. Recall at the beginning of this comedy club stand-up session, I said there was two things. There was need and want. And what we're looking at now is the want question. The want question is key for any organization seeking a SOC 2, must clearly understand why they want it. We're probably not going to go to all this trouble for the good of our health, though if we do, attaining a SOC 2 will probably help us sleep at night, but that's not the objective of a SOC 2. As Mike mentioned, this is a service organization who's wanting to sell their services to other people, so they have got to give other bodies confidence. That's what a SOC 2 is about. But for many organizations, a SOC 2 is a responsive act, an act that is in reaction to a perceived or actual requirement or request. In my experience, organizations dive into SOC 2 with tremendous gusto. They invariably want to achieve the assurance yesterday, generally fail to comprehend the complexity of the journey, and often view it as a badge that will achieve short-term objectives, i.e. they've come across a lucrative contract or they want to get onto a framework. So that is the limit of their objective. In reality, this is where some of the problems lie. Achieving SOC 2 is generally a complex journey and can be, even for organizations, as Mike picked up earlier with the ISO 27001 badge or some other badge accreditation there. But once completed, this journey can represent a big step towards demonstrably maintaining an InfoSec posture that is robust and includes current best practice, and hence, and enhances a key thing here is trust, because what you are trying to do is convince somebody, an organization you've had no dealings with, to trust you. But what do I mean by this? In the digital world, just like the physical world, where a group of friends or business associations, you know, somebody might have to borrow you a set of golf clubs for a round of golf or something. You basically say, yeah, that's all right. I know you're okay. I've met you twice. You didn't actually steal my wheels off my car in the pub car park. Here's my clubs. They're your favorite clubs. You've just bought them. You paid a lot of money. They're custom fit, but we won't go into that bit. But what we are looking for is that the person or organization we've lent them to, in this case, the golf clubs, they're going to look after them in the same way as we'll do. They're going to finish their round of golf. They're going to clean them. They're going to put them outside of the bar. They're going to go and ignore them, and then somebody will have nicked them. or should I say, if I'm being proper this afternoon, stolen them. And we wouldn't expect anybody we lent our prized possessions to care so little about looking after our goods. And this is what we are looking for. This is the mentality of looking at a SOC 2. A SOC 2, if you like, is before I hand over the golf clubs to somebody, a friend, they will give me a piece of paper which is effectively a reference from a third party that says they are going to look after my prize assets. In other words, just like a SOC 2, I am requiring certain assurances. They will treat my valuables with the same care and respect that they hopefully do themselves. And this is where a SOC 2 differs and comes into its own. This is the difference between a 1 and a 2. It requires management, just like SOC 1, to set out their approach to ensuring that a client's valuable data and information is protected from threats. In other words, it causes management and the service organization to think very, very carefully about its internal control environment that it has created, and question whether it is sufficient to adequately mitigate the risks that they have or should have identified through the risk assessment, and whether those controls are appropriate, implemented, and most importantly, applied consistently. We must remember that a SOC 2 report is for the benefit of the user who wants to use our services, or we may be trying to convince to use our services. It's not for our benefit or the public at large. And to reach this level of satisfaction, they need to fully understand the controls that management have put in place, and also have the assurance that someone independent of management, a competent third party, have reviewed these controls and their design, the way they have implemented on me, and the way they are operated. This is a SOC 2 report. Just to draw an example out here, take an organization that administers promotional funds for companies. We've all seen the adverts, I trust, where you can buy a printer and get £50 back, subject to registering, the warranty or something, or a camera. A lot of this is put out to a third party. So this particular company, one of the big printer manufacturers, would want assurances that this organization is going to have set up appropriate systems and procedures to not only manage the administration of the promotional activity, but also look after the funds that they may be handing over to them to pay out. So they will not just, in this instance, be interested in the IT security controls, but they may also be interested in the cash controls or the funds transfer controls that they have got in place to ensure money is only paid out on presentation of the appropriate evidence that has been set out and required. Really, I've just brought this in to set it down as we have to look at the organizations we want to deal with and the services we want to offer in deciding what to bring into our control framework here. A SOC 3, before I just sort of wrap up this session, because I've probably been going on too long, SOC 3 is really something we want to put out there. It's a bit of marketing. It's a bit of promotional material that says to the public and users at large that we understand people have requirements for these sort of reports. A SOC 3 tells a user or protected organization absolutely nothing about our internal control framework, the tests, or the way it's designed, because that would probably be putting too much sensitive information out into the public domain, which is something no organization wants to do. If you want to flip onto the next slide, Richard, there,
Sure. Sure. Just before we move on, so SOC 1 is to provide assurance for financial controls,
Yeah.
just general assurance, and the way we process our finances is not vulnerable to fraud. SOC 2 report. Then now we're talking about actual verification of controls, and then the SOC 3 is a marketing feel good hug. Just
That,
the way
yeah.
I start to generalize. Yep. Okay.
That is a good synopsis. Yes.
A couple questions came in though, Steve. One is, first question is, are your clubs available this weekend? Second question was, how are the controls actually? I already answered that first question. Sorry, you got to get your clubs. We got to get your clubs over to Nick by 10 o'clock for tee off time on Saturday. How are the controls, for regardless of the report, actually identified? Say this control should be applied in terms of the report. So not all the criteria are applicable, but who determines what controls should be verified and who signs off on the report? Two questions that came in back to back while you were.
Two questions. Let's take the first question. The driver for the sets of requirements comes from a trust services criteria, which we'll look at a little bit more detail later. But it's management's responsibility to actually design the controls that they think are appropriate to deliver the objective. It's the service organization's independent auditors who are charged with signing off the audit report on those controls, but management's responsibility to sign off the overall SOC report there, the attestation. So within that,
so the business. No, I was just going to say, so the business determines what controls are applicable. The independent auditor verifies those controls are in fact in place and effective, and then management would sign off on the report.
So the auditor produces an audit report, and that is included within the SOC report, that management sign off and talk broader about the organization and the control framework.
Okay, and this is what we started to talk about then. Which report is going to be right for the company?
Yeah, so in summary, we've gone through this. So this is very, very simple to draw this section to a sensible conclusion. A little bit of pulling together the things we've actually spoke about before. So if what we're looking at is we want to reassure our stakeholders that we're managing the business with strong governance and to appropriate levels of trust, that our financial statements can be relied upon. We're talking of a SOC 1 report. If we are in the business of selling our services and convincing an organization to trust us with their data, processing their data, storing or managing some parts of their operations, we're talking of a SOC 2 report. If we're effectively looking to actually promote ourselves broader, that we appreciate the SOC requirements, we're including as part of our publicity marketing materials a SOC 3 report, which incidentally, it's very difficult to get to a SOC 3 report without going through the SOC 2 journey, but we just would not be publishing the description of controls in that report into the public domain.
Got it. Okay, one other question just came in here in terms of if we had a question from somebody who said, if we're already ISO compliant, is there a fast track to any one of these reports, 1, 2, or 3, that given we got an ISO framework already in place? ISO framework. I think that's an obvious question. Is there, if I've already got ISO working, what, in terms of that I'm verifying the effectiveness of the controls, the implementation and the effectiveness controls, is this a fast track to a SOC report? And if so, which one?
Richard, shall I pick that up in the next bit? Because I'm going to talk about the two types, and I think that will naturally come out of that.
Good. Okay, Mike.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about SOC 1, 2, and 3. Now we've got two different types, a type 1 and a type 2. Now, a type 1 is just looking at the design of the controls. So we've decided what's in scope. We've probably come up with some risks. Now, do the design of those controls, so the control objective and the controls that meet that control objective, do they look sensible that it's going to control our risk? So that's quite high level. We're just testing the design. So it gives us a level of comfort. But where we really want comfort of those controls, we need a type 2 report. The type 2 report is then testing operating effectiveness. So are those controls actually operating consistently over a period of time? And as I said, usually that's going to be a 6-month or 12-month period. Are they working effectively? On the question of we've got a couple of questions around 27001. So yes, you can use some of the principles in 27001 as defining your controls. So it's going to be part of your control framework. So that part, yes, you can fast track a little bit, but you can't fast track the operating effectiveness test because the independent auditor needs to undertake that work to give themselves some comfort those controls have been operating effectively over a period of time. And this is where the testing is a lot more robust than you will find in a 27001 audit. So yes, in part, it does help you fast track because it helps you to identify and articulate the controls that you can have in your management control framework. So that part you can fast track. The actual attestation piece, though, you can't, because we will not, the auditor, the independent auditor, will not rely on the work of others. They need to satisfy themselves those controls have been operating consistently and effectively.
Got it. So it's a fair summary, though, to say that type 1 is just to say they're there, controls are there. Type 2, they're there and they're effective, but okay, big difference.
A very big difference. Now, if I'm a organization and I'm using the services of a service provider, I want a type 2 every time because that's going to give me the best level of confidence. Yes, it's going to cost more, but what does the test and design do? It doesn't really give that much comfort. And as part of the type 2, you would have to go through the test and design first and then complete the operating effectiveness. So that's going to give you the best level of comfort.
I'm not sure if this is the best place, but we just got a good question. We probably should have, that would have been probably better upstream we not to keep bringing up ISO, but is in terms of the scope, is there a statement of applicability like that would apply for the scope, just like the SOA applies for ISO compliance?
Yes. So the statement of applicability in 27001 is really just selecting the control objectives that's articulated in 27001 as part of a management framework. So we can use that as a basis. But yes, I suppose you could say yes. Your articulation of your management controls, in effect, I suppose, is your statement of applicability. So these are the controls that we have defined that we're going to operate over this.
Got it. Okay, gents, let's talk about the trust criteria here. This is pretty much the foundation of the security controls. Stephen, you want to lead us off here?
Yeah, I'll lead off, but if I can probably just draw an eye under the ISO 27001 questions a couple of times. Mike's mentioned the statement of applicability and ISO 27001 scope. And the key is really, you can't really fast track unless you can map the scope of your ISO 27001 sets of controls to the required controls for your SOC 2. So they could be narrower, broader, or serve a completely different purpose. So each organization, there is no move to step 3 just because you've got 27001, but there are mapping exercises that's done it that you can do that bring the two into line, and you can see which can be relied upon from that point onwards.
But let me interrupt you there, Stephen. Just ask you, going back to the scope, because fundamentally, then, just to be clear, who establishes the scope of what's in audit and what's out of audit? If I come and say, okay, I have a platform, I have a SaaS platform. Is it the SaaS platform? This idea of determining specifically the scope, whether it's in a stated a statement of applicability, but what's in scope and what's out of the scope. we said earlier that it's the client, it's the customer that says, well, I'm going to certify against these trust criteria that we're going to talk about. But at the end of the day, if you walk in the door, isn't scope confirmation in terms of how these controls are mapped to provide security, availability, processing integrity, all to the service? Isn't that the foundation of writing up the report?
Foundation of writing up the report, Richard, is actually the management scoping exercise for the type 2 to meet their objectives. So what ISO 27001, with its statement of applicability, its information security management system, may be a broader brush, more holistic system to cover off the way a company operates, whereas management's description of controls that are drawn from the trust services criteria for a SOC 2 audit are about the services it provides. So that's in my mind, the easiest way. So some of those controls which support the information security management system will also be very, very critical in driving the services, but the services could have different elements to it, but which may either require greater depth or greater breadth of coverage.
But would you ever have an instance in which an auditor differs with the business in terms of the scope, where the auditor says the scope is too small or too big?
Well, what you'll have when you're looking at the type 1, which is a design of controls, the auditor will go through and look at the objectives that were put in there and would actually turn around to the client and say, basically, we don't think you've got this design right. We think you've got it too narrow.
Okay.
We don't think you've got it the right breadth or depth in this particular area. That's where the test of the design of the controls comes in to ensure that they are meeting the objectives as stated.
And this may be a conversation anyway with the customer and the service provider. It could be the service provider decided they want to go down the SOC 2 route, and they'll define precisely what they want. But what really they should be doing is having a conversation with their customers, their clients, to see, what are the areas of comfort they need to get to. So quite often this is a little bit of negotiation between the provider and the customer to make certain we are covering everything that the customer needs.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Shall we talk about each of the criteria and what types of controls would be in the difference between privacy and?
Yeah, let's. I think this session is not going to facilitate a deep dive.
Just in general. When we talk about privacy, we're talking about encryption controls, and when we're talking about, but what I'd be looking for this discussion would just the, in terms of lump sum, well, what would be the difference between, confidentiality and privacy controls?
Probably a different way of looking at it, Richard, because for the SOC standard, the only one of the 5 that's critical for that standard is a security, of the 5 security criteria. So the way the schematic is drawn, then it's drawn like this, and this is a standard way of drawing it, is probably misleading, because what it should be is we should have the security standard and then the other 4 sat within that security standard. So to actually, the only technical requirement for a SOC 2 attestation is to comply with the trust criteria and the points of focus, and the points of focus are very, very specific control requirements that sit under the security standard. And the security standard, as you see there, has got 2-factor authentication, but privacy has also got 2-factor authentication in it there. So the security standard is the base point for a SOC attestation. Dependent on user requirements, then drives whether there is a deep dive into any of the other 4 areas. So if it's critical, for example, to maintain in the dear old CIA triad, availability of systems. What you will be deep diving into there is business continuity, fallback arrangements, recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives that an organization had to actually support that. If you are actually, and we're all driving down this route now, if you are dealing with highly sensitive personal data, we will be doing a much deeper dive into the processes and the security we put around privacy, for example, and bringing into that the sort of access controls we might be allowing and how we control data subjects' ability to exercise their rights, for example, under the GDPR. So basically we have the security standard that we then, dependent on the demands of our customer base or the demands that put on the service that we offer, we may then decide as an organization to actually adopt all 5 of the categories and do the deep dive across board, or just security and 1 or 2 other. It depends on our requirements at the time. Now, the way these are drawn up, Mike mentioned in his introduction COSO. Now, COSO has been around since about 1993, 94 when that came about, but the latest variant is much more up to date than that. 2015 from memory. I always get that wrong, whether it's 13 or 15, the last update. Mike, maybe you can help me there later. But what basically it is so many of security standards we see these days of best practice are drawn from the COSO framework criteria and what they call the points of focus. Now, COSO actually has 5 key elements. And it looks at a holistic, the organization in a holistic way. And that looks at the control environment. It looks at their approach to risk, the actual activities that take place as part of that control. It looks at the way an organization deals with information and communications throughout that organization and how it monitors those activities. All those elements, if you like, are then overlaid onto the controls that's put in place to drive the SOC trust criteria there. So in essence, what we have is, at a high level, we have those 5 elements there. We scrape past the surface just a little bit. We have the trust service criteria, which are the various elements that sit below that, like access control, 2-factor authentication, how we control access, how we control distribution of data, what our management structure is like. And then just below that, we have something called points of focus, and there are several hundreds of those that actually direct us into the key elements that we would want to include when we are looking at our SOC report. And that might be at a, when we're developing software, they might say, what's our approach to having our software secure develop? How do we maintain a secure development process within our software? If we are looking at governance, what is our governance process for management? What are governance reports? What are governance structures? How is a risk committee organized, etc. So to look at the trust services criteria, the five controls criteria, we have to then do a deep dive below these principles. And what these principles are designed to do is support 3 basic elements there. I mentioned the CIA triad before, but those principles are expected to act as guidance for us to put the controls in place to ensure that we maintain confidentiality of data, integrity of processing, and availability of that data for our clients. What I don't want to do at this point in time is go to a deep dive right into the background of all those principles, because we won't have time. And each one of those sections we could run a 2-hour seminar on and only scratch the surface. But in essence, what we are saying SOC is based on COSO. COSO is a well-established, holistic information security and risk management framework process with well-proven and evolved criteria for implementing and assessing an organization's control environment.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a good explanation. And it's funny because we got 3 or 4 questions just as you were explaining that. So just prior to that, everybody was asking the same amount of the same type of question. What drives the strategy like COSO, and you picked up, but when you talk about deep dive, is there any standard, not a standard, is there any criteria used like NIST or 27002 controls standard that you would use in terms of looking at the granularity of the controls and the integrity of controls on a granular level?
It's interesting because COSO, the evolution of COSO actually predates NIST. So
yep.
If you look at some of the approaches within NIST, certainly the latest privacy framework that they've put together and other things, they can be linked back to some of the original thinking behind COSO back in the 90s. So COSO, I tend to think of COSO as the granddaddy of these sort of frameworks, and so much is drawn from it. It is very interesting to actually go back if anybody's interested. And there's something called the COSO cube. Go look it up, go Google it, have a look. And it is
COSO cube?
COSO cube. And it actually explains COSO in 3 dimensions across the organization. But COSO really is the granddaddy of all those. So when you're looking at the statement of applicability in 27001 and the issues of 27001, some of the criteria, you will directly come back to COSO there.
Great.
Where we look
Guys,
at,
I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, where we're looking at detailed controls though, Richard, is that if we are using NIST, if we're using CIS, if we're using COBIT, ITIL, TOGAF, managing successful programs, PRINCE, PMBOK 27001, we have defined some controls. We can include that into our management control framework as part of a SOC exercise. So all that good stuff we're already doing, we don't throw away. We just include it in our scope of management controls.
Thanks for that, guys. Let's talk about benefits here. What are the benefits of my organization getting a SOC compliance, an independent attestation, either 1, 2, or 3?
Yep. Again,
Mike.
Yeah. Again, there's benefits on both sides here. So benefits of a service provider. You are demonstrating you have got good governance and management controls in place. So it's going to protect our brand because we're less likely to make a big mistake. Therefore, it's going to help us, gain more customers, well, retain customers and gain more customers. So that gives us a competitive advantage. It could be that market differentiator in when we are competing for services. And overall, we improve our service. In fact, we've got good, effective, efficient controls in place that are operating. So if we are a software developer, if we are putting in systems that are right first time, that's going to save us money. It's also going to keep our customers happy. On the other side, if I'm a customer of a service provider, this gives me some comfort that, again, those controls are operating effectively. I've probably got 2 choices of how I can get that comfort. I can go in and audit myself if I can get an audit right of access, but that's quite costly. Why wouldn't I want to go in with a number of other customers of that service provider, and we just have one audit done, which gives us all the comfort that things are operating effectively. So there's some real benefits both for a customer of a service provider and the service provider themselves.
Yep. Good. Thanks for that, Mike. We've got a couple questions, and we still got five minutes or so to talk about some questions. A couple of them go back to some ground we covered, but require a little clarity, or people are asking for some clarity. I think this is a good question. How many controls does SOC 2 actually provide us? Question one. And the follow-up question is, and so do we need to explain why a control is included or excluded from the report?
Okay, so you're defining your management control. So it's up to you to decide how many controls are in your frame.
Which we've said, how many controls. So, but the SOC criteria gives us a lot of criteria. So it's in that respect, it's almost like ISO to say, okay, this would apply, and this would apply, and this would apply. But after that is then in terms of what you're not going to apply, in terms of what's not included, what's excluded, you have to justify exclusion of any of those established criteria.
So you are defining what is your management framework, what are your management controls. Once you have defined that, the independent attestation will test all the controls that management have defined. But that definition of what controls are included is up to the.
So you don't have to justify why you've excluded some controls or some recommended controls. Yep.
No, sorry, Mike.
Yeah, when it comes to estimation, though, is the independent auditor may question, well, why you do this operation, so why haven't you included in your scope of controls?
Right, but it's not a question of going line by line and saying this is excluded for the following reasons. You would identify your main controls, identify the objectives of those controls, line those up to the management controls, and that's what you're attesting to. Okay, so there's you've got to opt in, and by opting in, you opt out. You have to specifically opt out. Is there a report template that everybody follows?
There's no,
I know the answer to this.
Yeah, just to pick up, we've got it's driven from COSO. They're the principles, the criteria, the principles behind it, not actually stating the controls. So what management are looking at the principles they're following, and then making a statement of what the control will be to apply that principle. So it's not like there's a pick list of controls. What there is a list of effectively requirements of those controls to deliver an outcome. So that's a key difference there. There is no report template. The templates go as far as saying the sort of things that should be included in a report. But there is no tried and tested template because everything is just slightly different dependent on the objectives and the requirements of the organization. And it is, at the end of the day, management's description of the controls which the auditor is actually auditing.
Right. Yeah, and then I had the question, is there a report template that all auditors use?
No. In short.
If not, why not? Yeah.
Why?
Is it because of
the guidance that's issued by the AICPA says the sort of things that should be included in the report template? A number of organizations actually purport to offer a general template, but because of the nature of the reporting and the depth of the controls, there is no defined template. There's no defined set wording as there is in an external audit report where they pass an audit opinion, a true and fair view, etc. So there is elements that are expected to be included, but the key thing is there a report from the auditor which is a narrative of the sort of tests they've taken part, and an annex which actually includes a description of the controls of tests the auditor has actually undertaken and the conclusion of those tests. But it's a basic layout rather than a template.
And guys, Mike, do you find that there's a lot of subjectivity then from one auditor to the next in terms of the length, the depth, the granularity, I guess, to go back to that word, of each report written? Doesn't this lead to
yeah, but whilst there isn't the template,
if there's no established, don't call it all right, we call it a template. If there's no established report template, then I guess because I've talked to a couple clients who said they're shopping around for the right auditor in terms of the auditor's perspective then becomes critical in terms of his or her subjectivity about how much of depth and breadth to include in the report.
Okay, so there's guidance, and as Steve says, typically in the report there will be a description of management controls. The auditor will then describe what tests they've undertaken and what their conclusion is. The actual robustness of that testing should be consistent. So as I said, you are testing those controls of operating effectively over a period of time. So
you guys, in general, you guys don't see a discrepancy, a wide variety of report types. Generally, I've seen reports that have been published on the web, and some, for me, that was of note. Some of them can be of great detail, and others can be 2 or 3 pages. And while they're all working off the same guidance in terms of how much time they spend each audit, seems to be subject to the decision of the auditor.
In my experience, when you look at that, it also comes down, it's the decision of the auditor how they actually test and validate the design and operating effectiveness of the controls. How much actually narrative goes into the report and the description of those controls is actually the gift of management. So, for example, the management could describe the controls in 1 line or several pages on each control.
And the auditor would respond in kind in terms of the depth and the.
That tends to be the case, yes. The auditor's role is actually to, whether the description is 1 line or 1 page, the auditor is to actually understand the objective of the control and test the effectiveness and the design of that control. But management may choose to actually write War and Peace on a control, or just a very, very high level summary, and sometimes that depends on just how much management want to put out there to the customer base as well.
Yeah, guys, I'm conscious of time, but I would like to squeeze in 2 more questions. The first one is, in general, SOC 2 report something to a mature organization who already has a mature, framework, governance framework, and they're interested in moving to a SOC 2 type report. They're already ISO compliant. In general, how long would it take an organization to prepare for SOC 2 type 2?
Again, it's difficult to ascertain. I've gone into organizations to help them prepare for this type of attestation. I was told that yes, we're 27001 certified. We're using ITIL. We're using managing successful programs. But when you look into it, is they are using these type of things in certain areas of the business, but not consistently across the whole of the business. So it's difficult to say how long it's going to take, because it does depend on what's there at the moment, and has it just been a paper-based exercise to tick a box, or are they doing this properly? And it depends on the scope and how many controls we've got in there. So it is difficult to put a figure on that.
And last question, is it mandatory for service organizations to go for a SOC audit annually once it's obtained? We didn't talk about that.
Usually it would be an annual statement, because the attestation is looking typically at those controls consistently operating over a 12-month period.
What many organizations tend to do. Yeah, what many organizations tend to do is run them alongside of their external audit reports. So they'll be repeated annually, because at the same time, the external auditors will possibly look to rely on some of the work that's done in the SOC report on the systems if its scope covers those areas.
Yep.
And it's likely to be more aligned going forward. So some of you may have heard that in the UK, government have just issued a consultation paper on audit reform. It is likely that the result of that is going to include a more robust year-end report, where organisations are going to have to make some comments on technology and cyber controls. So I think SOC type reports are going to become even more important in the years to come.
Yep. Gents, thank you for that. That was excellent. Thank you very much. We do have 5 or 6 questions that have come in. To everybody who's submitted questions, we're out of time. Sorry. Anybody who submitted questions, we'll get you some emailed answers right back to you. Here's Mike and Steve's contact details as well. If you want to pick their brains, don't hesitate to send them an email and ask them something directly. Let me ask you one favor here before I let you go. We've got a survey at the end of this. I think it's 5 or 6 questions about SOC, and to help us design these series of webinars for our SOC at TUME webinars series. Anyway, I'd please, if you could just take 2 minutes at the end of this webinar to fill out the 5 or 6 questions, the survey. It really helps us gear what topics to help us put together webinars like this for the future. Anyway, let me thank you all for once again, Mike, Steve, thanks for that. That was great. To everybody listening, don't hesitate to send Mike or Steve a direct question. In the meantime, everybody who has submitted questions, we'll get you some answers emailed back to you. Thank you all for joining us. We'll let you know when the next the next in the series of our SOC at TUME webinar series is coming up. But thanks for joining us. Thank you very much. I hope that was helpful to you all, and thanks for your good questions. They're still rolling in. Questions are still rolling in. We got to sign off, but we'll get answers back to you. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.